Today we have a very unusual guest in the studio. We have somebody who has a very interesting reputation from about 20 years ago when he was a pivotal player in the Holden Racing Team and was one of the people who, by his actions, reformatted the way that public relations in motor racing took place. And to a great degree, some of his ideas and styles are still being used today. I'm talking about a gentleman by the name of Paul Weissel, Wally to everybody who knows him in motor racing. And I'd like to say good afternoon to you, Wally.
And good afternoon, Ray. Lovely to speak with you and to chat with someone who's been in this business damn sight longer than I have even.
Yes, I can say that I've done the years, definitely. We've done the sort of research on your background, and I understand that you grew up in Albury, and
yes.
that one of your first jobs out of school was at the local Holden dealer, Preston Motors. Everybody has to start somewhere, but why did you start there?
There's two things that I really enjoyed growing up. I wasn't the best of students, shall we say, Ray. I had an elder brother who went and got his New South Wales leaving certificate. I'm not sure what they're called these days. And he went on and became a teacher. I had a sister who did her leaving certificate and went on to become a teacher. I had another sister who left school at what we call then intermediate year, but she did a business course and was very good secretarial and typist and all those sorts of things working in offices. And then you had me, the baby of the family, who was basically 1950s, 60s rebellious dill, bit of a bogan. School to me was a total waste of time. The people that tried to direct you in employment said, "Oh, you'd be very good working in a bank or working in as a teacher." And I thought, God, can't you come up with anything else? But so I was a bit of a rat bag. And got to, I suppose, somewhere in year fifth form, as it was called, what's that, whatever it's called these days, and went, no, stuff this, I've had it. And there's two great things I enjoyed were radio and car racing. Love cars, love car racing, and I love radio. Didn't know how I could possibly get into radio, but I thought, well, cars, there's a job going at Preston Motors, and I applied for it and got it, and working in the spare parts department. And so that allowed me to indulge in sort of in the fringe or periphery of cars, if you like. I wasn't a mechanic by any means. And with that, it enabled me to get my first car, which was a 1955 FE Holden, which was completely rebuilt, courtesy of Preston Motors spare parts department. And went quite quickly, didn't stop, didn't turn, but we had a good fun driving it, and which also allowed us to get out the Hume Weir circuit and watch motor racing. So therefore I was starting to enjoy that aspect of my love of motor racing.
Yes, Hume Weir was one of those country racetracks that attracted pretty much all of the top drivers at one stage of the game or another, and they had some fantastic events there, and it was a peculiar racetrack, wasn't it? I mean, you had that situation where you went into the bowl or the quarry or whatever they called it from memory, and the cars were separated by a concrete wall and they were going in opposite directions.
They were. You're right in saying it was a quarry. It was a quarry. It was where they carved out all the rock and stone, etc., to create the Weir Wall and the Lake Hume Reservoir. So that someone had the brilliant idea of putting a racetrack in it, and it was very short and quite dangerous, I might add. But it was a really good, and it was a real amphitheatre type situation in the quarry end of it, and that's where we used to go to watch. And we'd get out there early on a Sunday morning, and having loaded up with ice to put in the esky with your 24 cans and your cold roast chook, and we'd get out there, be first in the gate, go up the top of the quarry with the cars, and you'd park your car right up to the fence, and then leave a gap and a car and a gap and a gap, etc. And you'd basically sit on your rug between and look over the edge of the quarry at these cars going down in front of you. And that's when I first saw one Peter Brock in the A30 with the Holden engine, and thought, this guy's bloody brilliant. So that's how we got involved with that then. But then I wanted a little bit more than just being sitting on the periphery or sitting on the fence. I wanted to get involved, so got involved and was helping out in scrutineering, basically doing paperwork, and that was with Kim and Brad Jones's dad, who basically ran the show for the racing club in Albury.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, when you go back to those days? That was when motor racing was a sport as against an industry. And the guys who came, even in the late 60s, when sponsorship had started, most of the guys with the fast cars were paying their own bills, which is something absolutely unknown
your own
today.
Cars.
Yeah, unknown today. Yeah. I mean, you know, the number of people who are paying their own bills in the top level of motor racing are almost non-existent.
Yeah, it'd have to be in the in the sports cars or Trans Am type things where people are still funding it. But basically, at top level, no. You if you don't have dollars and sponsors behind you, you don't play.
So you mentioned Mr. Peter Brock. So that's where you first saw him in the A30. How did that translate from watching him as a spectator to being involved with him in a professional sense?
Well, some years later, when I was in radio and I was with Fox FM in Melbourne, and that gave me entree. I was the sports journalist there, and it gave me entree to go to race meetings, and then so you'd interview guys and do all that. And so I slowly got to meet Peter that way. And so if you turned up at the garage at a race meeting and what have you, come on in, we'll have an interview, not a problem. And then in 86 it was, I think 3XY had finally gone by the board, could have been earlier than that, and there was space for rent, for want of a better term, on the Brock the Brock racing cars, on the HDT cars, and we were owned by the Osteria group, and they said go and get involved with this. So we cut a deal with Brock that we got the Fox FM logo on the front and rear bars of the cars, and then they were able to leverage that then against sponsors to get stuff on air. So that's how. So then you started to become part of the team because you could roll in any time because of the Fox FM connection. Got to know he and Bev quite well, and stayed with the team when we went up to Bathurst out here and all that sort of stuff. So that's when it became more than just a business association and radio interviewer versus sports interviewee, and got to know the guy quite well. And then it allowed me not long after that to buy an HDT Commodore. So I was really quite tied up with it, and I had this wonderful Commodore, and which someone stole not too many months later, unfortunately. But that was how I got involved and got to know Peter as opposed to just Peter the racing car driver.
Yeah, that was in the era when John Crennan was kind of the power behind the throne at HRT, because there's that sort of changeover period where it was the Holden dealer team for a long time, and then it became the Holden Racing Team. Now, Mr. Crennan was, I guess, the smart guy in the team, or probably the smartest guy in the team, and he was the one who pulled the deals together. How did you find working with John?
He's fantastic, and even today I'm still in awe of the guy. His acumen, his business and brain acumen, and how he can see things and read things is just remarkable. He was the one actually who pretty much directed Holden to get out of HDT when Brock had his polarizer thing going, but then John was the guy that convinced Holden to bring Brock back into the fold to give some credibility back to the fledgling HRT, as it were. And John was very much across everything that was happening. He was an avid listener of radio and media generally, and he could look at someone or an outlet where he would benefit the organisation he was working for. So because Fox FM at that stage was the number one station in Melbourne, then when I rang up, I got straight through to him because I go, well, how I listen all the time, blah, blah, blah. So I got to know him that way, had got a few cars for road tests out of HSV for various things. And so when I spent 93 or half of 83, I'll get it right through, 93, with Advantage Racing, as it was Brock was racing for then. And then at the end of the season, it was announced that Brock was going back to the factory team at HRT. And Crennan said, look, no worries, Wal, I'm going to bring you across as well, and you'll be part of it. And I'd been working with Mobile as well, and they'd said the same thing, that year you're going to be part of it. Well, in early 94, January, nothing, and getting into towards February and nothing. I'm thinking, that's so much for that promise. And then Crennan said, right, come on, we'll have a chat and get it sorted. And so I started with HRT in the same year Brock went back to the factory team in 94.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, that Peter was able to sort of move in and out of the official works team almost at will, but there was a lot of really strange circumstances behind those moves. I think best the least said about that, the better, I guess. But in that time when you were effectively the PR man for the team, you were working more or less in one side of the exercise, and another chap by the name of Tim Pemberton, known to everybody as Plastic, he was an outside contractor working for Holden as well. That must have been a very interesting exercise in trying to figure out who was responsible for what part of the PR program.
It was. By the way, all your best wishes go out to Plastic as well, who hasn't been in good health for the last couple of years and remains in hospital and not all that well, but the brain still works. It's just the physical part of him is not the best. So, but Plastic and I had some interesting times over the years together, and particularly he saw that because he'd already done HDT as their PR stuff because he was paid for by Holden, so he automatically did the HDT PR work, and anything to do with Holden and anything official of Holden, Plastic was the PR guy for it. So when Brock was going back to HRT, and there was an opening for someone to do the PR, he naturally assumed that he would get it. And when he didn't, and this jumped up little goose that came out of radio got it, we weren't particularly happy about it. So Plastic wasn't all that, shall we say, helpful in the first year or so of the association of me with HRT.
Yeah, I guess having been, the sort of the guy in charge, all of a sudden to not be the guy in charge would have been fairly difficult, and that probably made it fairly difficult for you too. But I guess over the next year or two, things smoothed themselves out okay?
They did. It took probably a year and a half or so, but initially, because he couldn't just say, this is what you're doing, just saying, oh, this is an opportunity, and he had to ask permission, if you like, as opposed to just doing. And I was trying to establish myself as well, trying to think, well, I need to pick his brains, but I don't want to be led by him, if you like. So I was trying to establish my turf, and he was trying to regain the turf, if you like. So the one that springs to mind that where we didn't do the best job for both Holden on his behalf and HRT on mine was when we in 94 Bathurst, Ron Harrop came up with a nice little technical grey area in the rules about the location of the top strut mounts in the Commodores, where you could move them by a radius of 20 mil or something like that. But Ron took that to the nth degree and raised the top of the towers by 18 mil. And good old Larry went, man, that bloody car doesn't look right, cock, and got the scrutineers to have a look at it, and they said, oh, no, well, that's not legal. And anyway, shit broke loose, as you could imagine, about here's the factory team running an illegal car. That's bloody Tom Walkinshaw for you, always doing something illegal. And Plastic was in the media room and winding up all the guys that had the lead roles in the newspapers and the magazines who never stepped out of the media centre. And then he came in and said, you've got a problem. Well, yeah, really? Yeah. And the trouble is I didn't know in my first year what was at the foot of the whole thing. I didn't have it explained to me. So I said to Crennan, we need to get on the front foot about this. So he and I rocked down to the media centre to chat to the media, but I didn't know what was really going on. John's not technical, so we didn't come out of it all that well. So I went back and I said, for God's sake, tell me what this is all about. Explain it to me in layman's terms. And if necessary, we need to explain our side of it and why it was done to the media guys. So we battled through that one, and Tom got involved and was going to sue people and to have a Supreme Court injunction on Bathurst in '94 to stop it from going ahead unless we're allowed to do what we want to do. And it just got really, really messy and ugly. But that was probably the worst one as we're trying to blend our way into the situation in the first couple of years.
Yes, I can imagine trying to sort of weave your way through the minefield. Not exactly a fun thing for a PR guy to be doing.
It wasn't because you're still finding your feet within the team. And Jeff Grech was the team manager, and he came out from the Lowry school of don't tell no one nothing. So he just thought you're a PR flog because he'd been used to plastic and he reckoned he was a PR flog. And so the journos, the key guys, while I'd known them, they didn't know me from that position. So I was trying to work my way around the whole thing. So I sat down with Ronnie Harrop and I said, explain exactly what this is all about. He explained it to me. I went, okay. I went to the journos and I said, if you want to know the other side of it, please come down and I'll get Ron to show you and talk your way through it. You can ask any questions you like. So that was probably the better way of doing things, but we probably should have done it a whole lot bloody earlier because then the thing was running out of control. But we got it back on an even keel after that, and then I started to learn, when you had to stand up for things and what have you. And it also, I started to get more, I suppose, entrenched within the team as a member of the team as opposed to being, if you like, an outside contractor, which is what they were used to before that.
Mm. So in that period, you're talking sort of mid-90s, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was the period when there was a lot of movement backwards and forwards with sponsors, with manufacturer support. Holden were always the strongest supporter per se of race teams, but the HRT sort of went from strength to disappearing again. There were times when the team was really, really on top of it. There were times when they really weren't. Was the return of Brock the thing that sort of turned their fate back into a positive sense?
Yes, and that was John's methodology behind it, was to give some as much outside credibility to HRT as it was within the organisation and within Holden, because you had this thing that was called the Holden Racing Team under the auspices of Holden, or the name anyway, but you still had this Holden legend in Brock who was seen on the outside. So he saw the benefit of saying bygones be bygones. We won't talk about energy polarizers or any of this orgone energy. We just got to get this guy back into the fold. So that took a fair bit of time during 93 to convince Brock and Holden to come back on side again. So that certainly started to give us the credibility. But then again, we still didn't have the budget or the people or the technical side things laid down at that stage. It took another couple of years before that all got bedded down.
Yeah, it's interesting because in that earlier period, from memory, when Brock rejoined, you still had Thomas Mazera with the team?
Yeah, Thomas was the other driver. So it was Thomas and Brock for that first 94 and 95. And then Lowndes started to come in from there and went on full-time in 96. But Thomas, he's just one of the loveliest people in the world and one of the funniest people in the world. Pardon me, but a very low-key character. Probably different now, but at that stage he was pretty low key because he still wasn't comfortable in the English language all the time, and he also hadn't learnt when you say stuff and when you shouldn't say stuff.
Yes, I'm remembering some of those. I think I shouldn't have said that moments.
Oh, the best one obviously was when we'd had an average practice or qualifying day at a race meeting somewhere, and we had to, at the end of the day.
That was Eastern Creek.
It was at Eastern Creek, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay, I can never remember the venue, but I know it was a sponsor function we had to go, and you shouldn't go to sponsor functions at the end of the day, particularly when you've had a crap day. Brock got, and I didn't involve myself in the dog and pony show or being up on stage. You just say, "Oh, Brock would stand up there," and then he'd do, "Oh, yeah, it's all working our way through things today, and it's all very positive and blah blah blah." And then Thomas got up there and said, "No, the Carter was a box of shit, and the tyres were shit, and everything. It's okay to bag the tyres, mate, but not at a Bridgestone function."
Yes.
Oh, God. And that's when Crennan actually blew up with that one. So
I can remember you standing in the back of the room. You know, the look on your face was, "Oh, my career is over."
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, "Oh, now we're stuffed." So we learned again. You learn from mistakes, and we learned to do things better after that. And whenever we did public stuff, I basically became the moderator. And initially, Crennan said, I want to script it. I said, "You can't script it, John, but you've got to do something." So then we worked out that, okay, I'll ask the questions, and I'd ask a question of Brock, and then the same question to Thomas, and the next question to Thomas, and so on and so forth. And that's the way it sort of smoothly went through, and we could get away from the curly bits by having this, if you like, mastered type situational section going, and it all lasted pretty well until one day Brock decided he's going to bag Thomas about, that's all right for somebody who's brought up driving Skodas in Czechoslovakia, and Thomas has gone like that. That's not in the bloody script. And then started finding, you're the talk. You drive a Butternoston 830 with a bloody Holden engine in the thing. And that was it. We threw the script away. Then it just became, let's have fun and bag each other sort of thing.
Do you remember, and I can't remember which particular year it was, but the year that they drove together at Bathurst, and Peter drove the early part of the race. I think he did 2 stints, one back to back. Pulled into the pits, got out of the car. Thomas got into the car, and about 3 laps later, the car died. Do you remember what Thomas said when he got back to the pit?
That was 95, and we had a problem that year with faulty head gaskets, but we didn't find out about it because it was in those days you put your race engines in on Saturday night, ready for. So in other words, you did all your practice and qualifying, shootouts, etc. And then you put the race engines in. Now, in those new race engines, we'd had new head gaskets. Whether they're from a different supplier, I'm not sure, but they were new head gaskets. Anyway, they went out on the warm-up on Sunday morning, and all of a sudden, both cars are chucking or mixing their oil and their water because the head gaskets were crook. So we were madly rushing into town and getting mail. What's going on here? These guys are getting bucket loads of oil from the local service station and throwing it down the throat of these cars and putting various other things in there trying to seal the things. And the one car went out really early, like in the first 10 laps. But the 05 thing was sailing along nicely. Brock went out, and as you say, he actually did the first stint. But in those days, he did about 30 to 32 laps from memory a stint. Brock's come sailing into the pits and, frantic punting anyway. And, typical Brock thing, "Oh, didn't you call me in? I'm sure you called me in. Some pit this lap." And it was like lap 28. Tom got in the thing and drove up Mountain Straight down and got in the radio and go, "What's wrong with this bloody car? There's bloody lights flashing and emergency warnings everywhere. The thing's buggered." And of course the media goes up to Brock and say, "Oh, Brock, what's happening?" He said, "I don't know. It was perfect when I got out." He just hung Thomas out to dry. He wasn't happy.
Yes.
Never Brock's fault, you see.
No, never. Peter Perfect. He was, what was the term? Teflon Pete. That's right.
Oh, absolutely.
That's right. Exactly. Nothing ever stuck to Pete. Okay.
No, not at all.
So that was mid-60s, what am I saying, mid-90s. And everything was sort of bowling along reasonably well, and suddenly Craig Lowndes happened. Now, that pretty much changed the dynamics, not only of the Holden Racing Team, but to a great degree touring car racing in general, because when he burst on the scene out of lower classes, a relatively inexperienced guy. Obviously, Brock took him under his wing, but he very quickly was the new Brock, wasn't he?
Yeah, there's something very special, and it's funny how people don't learn from things at times, but Thomas did not want to live in Melbourne because, bloody cold, and he wanted to live up in Queensland on the Gold Coast, or in the hinterland anyway. So he decided to move up there with Katie's wife because it was much better life. But that meant every time you wanted, and in those days, if you wanted to go testing, you went testing. Not a problem. You didn't have the limitations we had today. So if you wanted a driver to go testing, well, Brock was always off doing stuff with Mobile and with Holden, he was hardly ever around. And if you wanted to go testing, then you'd have to fly Thomas down from Queensland all the time. And I'm like, God almighty. Okay, for major test days, fair enough. But Jeff was thinking, well, how do I get around this problem? And I want to do just some general stuff at Calder, like bedding brakes, bedding diffs, and all the other stuff, and do some tyre stuff for Bridgestone. So he knew Frank Lowndes from Craig's dad from the HDT days, and he had been doing quite nicely in Formula Ford in a car that was basically built by Frank and Craig. And you always sort of tend to look at Formula Ford as to who's doing well in something they shouldn't go well in. And that way you got a true reflection of the driver capability. So Frank and Jeff got talking, and so then they said, well, okay, Jeff said, I'll get Craig to come out to call and we'll do some stuff, just bed some brakes in and do all that. So he started doing that on a reasonably regular basis, and then after a while I said, it's pretty good, okay. So one afternoon they'd said, well, okay, Craig, thanks, you've bedded all the brakes in, you've the diffs all running, everything's nice, and we'll put a set of tyres on, brand new fresh Bridgestone qualities, and away you go. And Jeff came back and the thing late that afternoon, just looked at me, raised his eyebrows, shook his head and said, what is that kid Lowndes? He said, you can bloody drive. So then he had to convince both John Crennan and Tom Walkinshaw this guy should get a run in the car, because at that stage in 94, the plan was to bring Rickard Rydell out, who raced with Tom in the Volvos in the British Touring Car Championship, was to bring him out to race at Sandown and Bathurst. And he said, well, okay, righto. But then Rydell couldn't come out because his wife was have to have a baby, couldn't come out for Sandown. But Jeff said, I want to put Lowndes in the car. And the powers that be went, well, we can't put an 18-year-old in the car. No. So, but Jeff kept fighting and stuck to his guns, and put Lowndes in the car and did a pretty good job at Sandown. And so then he said, well, I want him in the car at Bathurst. Well, that didn't go down well at all. I mean, this is me who'd sent stuff over to England, HRT stuff, to have photos taken with Rickard Rydell, the whole box and dice for the PR kits and everything. And Jeff wanted to put Lowndes in the car at Bathurst, which he did. And then we remember that he spun the thing and banged it and did all sorts of things in that the first stint at Bathurst in the dam in 94. But everyone only remembered the last stint in the race when he went round Johnny Bow on the outside, Forest Elbow. No, not Forest Elbow, Griffins.
Griffins, yes.
Yeah, and everyone and led the race at his first time out. And apart from the fact that we didn't have enough petrol in the car to get through, he probably would have won the thing. So it was a mixed feeling. Not a very good day for Brad Jones, because Brad had done an amazing job to get the car back in a position where it was both on the lead lap and challenging for the lead. Everyone remembered the 18-year-old kid doing this dramatic outside turn on around the outside of Johnny Bow, and poor old Brad didn't necessarily get the kudos that he deserved. So he wasn't very happy about the whole thing, and I think that was the last time he raced with us.
Yes, it's when Lowndes came on the scene like that, he sort of, it was very much like Brock back in the 60s, in the late 60s. But then there was that period when John Crennan, I think it was, who organised for Craig to go to Europe with the RSM Marco team in Formula 3000. That I mean, we're not necessarily asking you to tell the Craig Lowndes story in Europe, but it certainly didn't work out the way it was supposed to, did it?
No, that was probably, I think, cost us, not us necessarily. I think it was shared by HSV or Walkinshaw, for want of a better term, Holden and Mobile. But it was not far short of $1 million, which in 97 was a fair few dollars to go and do that. But I think in hindsight, we probably managed that badly in that we sent this pretty raw young kid, so said, here's an air ticket, off you go. And we really should have had someone managing it from his point of view with him at the time, as opposed to his then girlfriend to become his fiancée later, or wife later. So I don't think it was probably managed as well as we could have. And, the Helmut Marko is a pretty tough customer. So I don't think the money that we put towards that exercise was well spent, put it that way.
No, and I think it's sort of, there were such great expectations for Craig in open wheelers because he'd done the Gold Star here in Australia in the Formula Holdens in a cheetah from memory, probably the only cheetah that was running around. But that year in Formula One, that year in Formula 3000 certainly, I guess, put paid to his open wheeler career anywhere else. But clearly, at that time when he came back from Europe and he was brought back into the Holden Racing Team, that was a fairly straightforward deal, was it, I assume?
Well, the thing was, was if it didn't work out, you're going to go straight back in, and that was unfortunate then, because it meant that you had a gun like Greg Murphy, who I think was of extremely high calibre, as it turned out later with Bathurst wins, etc. with Murph. It meant that you had to make a decision, or management had to make a decision between Craig or Greg, because Brock was still that key man that we had, and so it was unfortunately Greg who was pushed to one side to allow Craig to come back. Now the results were phenomenal for Craig when he did come back, and then Brock retired anyway. But it meant poor Greg. I think had he been stayed with us for another couple of years, would have had an equal amount of success potentially.
Yes, Greg really came to Australia driving in Formula Holden.
Correct.
And then made the conversion across to touring cars, and there was no question how fast he was. So, at that stage of the game, the team obviously had what you would call, an excess of talent. You had Brock, you had Murphy, you had Lowndes. You only needed two.
Exactly. And then someone had to miss out. Well, as it turned out, halfway through, 97, Peter announced the first of his many retirements, the Dame Nellie Melba routine. But that was decided then that he decided that it was time to up stakes. I mean, the guy was 50 at that point, 51, 52. So there comes a time where you say, it's time to give it away. So that was announced, but had that been done sort of a year previously, it would have made a smoother transition, and you would have had the two young blokes in Murphy and Lowndes. But then again, you did that, you wouldn't have got Skaife. So, the decisions these guys have to make of drivers is not an easy one to make.
No, and then we ended up in that rather strange period of time where there were two Holden racing teams. There was the Toll team, and there's the HSV team and the HRT team.
Yes, you started. That was the start of that expansion thing that we ended up doing. But you were running that, and then we had. Don't forget, also we had the Young Lions thing going as well. And you had the Kelly boys and what have you. So you had all these other things that we'd gone from. You got to remember, right? When I started there in '94, there was 10 staff. By the time I left in 2004, there was 80. So the thing grew in 10 years something dramatically. So you were trying to find spots for drivers and cars and entries and all sorts of things, and it became a head spin, I reckon, for Jeff in trying to manage all that sort of thing. And how he did it so successfully is remarkable.
So at that point, when you got the Lowndes effect. When he came on the scene and as a fully fledged team driver, not just a sort of an experiment, that first year in the championship where he won, I think, 3 or 4 races on the trot, the beginning of the season, that must have caused, let's call it, pleasant problems within the team from a PR point of view, because you had this young 21-year-old winning races. You had Brock as the established team leader, but he was no longer the fast gun. He was now, if you would, a support driver to this young kid who was just blazing around and putting everybody else to shame. How difficult was that?
It wasn't as difficult as it would appear, and when you look back on it all these years later, it seemed to somehow happen seamlessly. I suppose you were fortunate in that Craig did have that success. If he'd been banging around there and sort of, throwing the car in the ditch and all that sort of stuff and costing you a heap of money, then it might have been a problem. But he just came out of the blocks, and I'll never forget Eastern Creek in '96, that first round of the championship. I think it was the first round. Yeah, it was. And it was a sort of like twilight evening thing, one of the first times I tried it. He'd done quite well in the first race and won his second race. I think he won 1 second, and then I think won the third race, which was the one in the evening on the Saturday night. And I went. We thought, oh, beauty, got a 1-1 the round. How good's that? That's very nice. And I sort of headed down to Pit Straight and what have you for when they do the presentations to, here's your drink, here's your cap, all the usual sort of stuff. And anyway, he pulled up, and that big stand at Eastern Creek was chock-a-block full of people, absolutely chock-a-block. And it was deadly silent. It was just like, it wasn't Brock, it wasn't Dick, it wasn't Larry. It was some kid. And they were just sitting there, just silent, looking. And Craig's pulled up. Yeah, I got that. And got out of the car. And I said, oh, yeah, you get a helmet off there, you give us a helmet, you put it down there, and here's a cap, and here's a drink, And he said, what do I do now? And I said, turn around to that group of spectators over there in the grandstand, I said, and just wave. So he did the Craig big smile wave, hey, go on, and they just erupted. I went, uh-oh, here we go. This is something special. And that was it. And it was just like, yep, instant acceptance. His guy smiled, waved, a la Brock, took his time out for the fans. And it made that thing, and that was it. It was tick in the box, done. And from that stage forward, and because there was no outside influences on Craig, management or anything else, just Frank in the background. He was followed at the racetrack, etc. But there was not a huge amount of demand on his time outside your normal sponsor type commitments for that year. So you could manage it quite well internally. Didn't need any outside management type people to get things right. So he could just concentrate on driving, racing. Okay, going to a Holden thingo, going to a mobile thingo, and again you could control the environment that he was in at the time, and everything worked fine. And we'd been working him through in the couple of years previously when he'd been driving, doing testing and driving in the enduros of if you went to a HSV owners thing, I went to most of them, and we did the interview type situation that I did with the other drivers, and he got used to that situation. So then when all of a sudden the demand was higher, he was pretty comfortable in that environment because he could basically talk about motor racing. No one talking about politics or anything other boring stuff. So he was in comfortable ground, and he grew in that area, and he is very, very good with people. I like Peter. Give people the time of day, sign autographs, do all that sort of thing. So it just was a really smooth transition, and he had Peter there to help him through and carry him through in group situations, and particularly after that Bathurst sprint race in '96, where Craig elbowed Wayne Gardner into the fence. Wayne wasn't particularly happy, and we went straight round to Wayne's transporter after the race and apologised and did all that, and he just sat there and copped Wayne giving him a huge spray. And I just want to say I'm sorry. And when Wade finished, he went his way. And then he was pretty quiet in the car going back to Sydney to catch a plane back to Melbourne. I was driving, and Craig was in the back seat, Peter's in the front with me, and Peter just had a chat to him all the way through, saying, "Look, no, it's fine, mate. These things happen. Don't worry about it. been, it's in your past, move forward, go for the next race meeting, don't worry about it, da-da-da. So, yeah, it worked really well, and Peter was really, really good in seeing that there's a new star on the rise and coming through, but he was going to help him rather than try to hang on to something that may not have been there anymore.
Yeah, because I think Peter must have seen the writing on the wall, as they say, with Craig being just so competent in the car, and it sort of, as you said, it sort of flowed one into the other fairly easily. But from a point of view of the guy in charge of the spin, as it were, in the media, you must have had quite a few circumstances where things didn't go well, and you had to sort of put a gloss on something that was pretty hard to polish. Any idea? Any specific memories from that period that you can relate without actually getting us into court?
No, the 96 one with Bathurst was the one that was, I suppose, springs to mind of when you're in pretty much damage control, for want of a better term, when the week before Bathurst on the Sunday, Craig was going to go on not Channel 9's was Wide World of Sport. I think it was Sports Sunday on Channel 7 here in Melbourne. And Bill Cannon was the producer, and we teed it up, and he was going to go in the studio and have a sit down and a chat and talk about Bathurst, which was coming up the following Sunday, and blah, 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 blah. And anyway, I got a phone call early on the Sunday morning from Jeffrey. He said, "Hey, Wall." I said, "Yes, Jeff." He said, "Got to get on Channel 7 and cancel Lowndes' interview and what have you in there today." I said, "Why?" He said, "Oh, bloody idiot's done himself a mischief." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, I'll talk to you later. Just cancel it." And hung up the phone. So anyway, I had to ring up Billy Cannon and say, "I can't, mate. You got the flu or got something, whatever." Whatever fib that I told at one of the biggest sports shows in the country, that why this bloke couldn't turn up. Okay, fine. So anyway, later on, Jeff rang me back and he said, "Did you cancel it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Bloody idiot was out with his mates yesterday." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're riding a motorbike." I said, "Yeah." "Without a helmet." and he's gone to do a jump over a gutter and got it bloody wrong and got pitched over the handlebars and landed on his knuckle head. It split his head open. So here's the guru. He's won the championship, about to go in the biggest race of the year the following week, and he's landed on his noggin without a helmet, split his head open, and they carted him off to hospital. And yes, you've got a concussion, and oh no. And so we've got to keep this out of the media. Oh yeah, okay, right. Okay, fine. Yeah, good. And for the first couple of days, we weren't sure whether he was going to be over his concussion well enough to race at Bathurst. Now, we normally got to Bathurst on probably Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then you did parades and street autograph sessions, etc., on the Wednesday, and then on track on Thursday. And the doctor said, no, can't travel yet. So we've got 3 drivers there on Wednesday, and doing the autograph session up the main street in Bathurst. And where's Craig? Oh no, he's held up in Melbourne on business. He'll be up later. So they finally let him out, and he flew up on the Wednesday late, and in time to go on the track on Thursday morning for the first practice session. But then we had, he's got great piece of his hair cut out where they'd stitched up his silly head, and we're trying to sort of keep the lid on it. And so we had this dance that we played for the whole weekend where he had to sort of, pretty much almost take his helmet off on the car, and I'd hand him a cap. He'd get the cap on, then he'd get out of the car and go off to the media and what have you. And there's, Paul Gover and Chris Lambden and what have you were looking at me, and I'm looking at them going, "What, guys?" And they say, "Everything all right?" "Oh, yeah, that's fine. No worries. And I'm looking at them, I'm thinking, these bastards know, and they're looking at me saying, "We know, but we're not going to say anything at the moment." Had he not won, he and Greg not won on Bathurst on 96, I reckon that would have been all over the headlines the next day. But because we won, he and Murph won, they just went, "Nod, okay, we'll let you have that one." But yeah, that was a bit of a trying week, that's for sure.
So, the next big step in terms of HRT and drivers was the arrival from the Gibson team of Mark Skaife Now, how did that settle in?
Initially interesting, because you've got to remember that, as I said, when I first started, there was 10 guys there, which rapidly grew. Now, Jeff had come across from Gibson's, and then he started encouraging Matty Crawford, Peter Schaefer, and him, all out of Gibson's because, it wasn't a happy little camp over at Gibson's. They lost the cigarette sponsorship dollars, and they were struggling for dollars, and life wasn't as very good. So, Skaife, I hope you might be mentioning, was probably was still young and learning management skills. He's a totally different beast later, and certainly these days. And so they weren't happy in that environment. So all of a sudden in 97, when Skaife came on board, they went, yeah, all right, okay, fine for the Enduros. But then more going into 98, when you had to make a decision with Brock's retirement and Craig coming back, was who gets the other gig. Is it going to be Mark Skaife, who's done the Enduros the year before, or Murph, who's been full-time with the team for that year? So there was a bit of angst within the team, and the decision was made to go with Skaife because of his record and what have you. And that's what Holden wanted as well. So that was a little bit, how's this going to work out? And I was coloured a little bit by what the guys said internally. Oh, bloody Skaife, Skaife's gone into the joint. First thing he did, walked into the place with a slab, threw it on the kitchen bench and said, "Let's go, boys." I went, "Oh, okay." Because the way to any mechanic's heart, mate, is with a slab of beer. So we sit down, okay, have a few beers and chat. And I'll give Mark this. He worked his bum off to make sure he was accepted in the team as a driver and nothing more. No, I'm not here for anything else. I'm here to be a driver. I'm here to take advantage of everything that you guys have been achieving the last couple of years and lead me on, and I'll go with you. And he was made a habit of always being in and around the race team. He'd certainly turn up every Friday afternoon at about 4 o'clock, and he'd walk in this place, slap, right, beer time, boys, beer o'clock, and we'd all knock off and sit down, have a couple of beers and a chat. And he did an amazing job of turning a group of guys who were a little bit negative into the positive. So that was a really excellent way of doing things the way he did it, and he was a delight to work with. I have no hesitation at all in saying he was one of the best people and most professional people I've ever worked with.
It's interesting because he was a very polarising character by personality from the outside looking in, I guess you could say.
Correct.
But changing subjects a bit, given the fact that you had to circulate right around Australia as everybody does in a championship sense, was there any places, specifically any racetracks that you really enjoyed more than others, or was there any that you really disliked intensely?
My two favourites, even sitting here today chatting to you, is the is Adelaide 500, Adelaide Grand Prix. When it was still when the Grand Prix was first out of there, the atmosphere and the environment in Adelaide was second to none, and certainly nothing like. I never enjoyed the Grand Prix in Melbourne. It just didn't have that feel about it. Whereas Adelaide was, we're so happy that this is happening. What can we do for you? Whereas in Melbourne, it was a semi-government situation, and it was like, you'll do this and you'll do that. Adelaide 500 was even better, the event itself, because it took over the city. You were in Holden's doorstep, the Elizabeth factory over there, when we still had a thing called Holden. So without a doubt, the favourite event of the year for me was Adelaide, and favourite race of the year without a doubt is Bathurst. The whole thing around Bathurst is just remarkable, and even any chance I get to watch anything Bathurst 12-hour, Bathurst 6-hour, the supercars of Bathurst, it's just you don't move me from the telly when Bathurst's on at all.
So. You left the team in the early 2000s. Was that just a situation where you'd had 20 years of doing pretty much the same job over and over and over again with different faces? Had it sort of lost its gloss, or did you get a better offer?
No, mate. If Arrow's Formula One and Tom Walkinshaw didn't go bust, and if it was still the same, everything the same today, I'd probably still be there, albeit running some sort of history museum and going, "This is the trophy that we won back in 1996." I loved every minute. I really did. But when Arrow's F1 went bust over in the UK, which then took HRT with it because that was TWR Australia, part of TWR Group. HSV had already been removed from the TWR thing, so the creditors couldn't get their hands on it. So when Tom lost it, and then Holden bailed it out, so that it, in their infinite wisdom of trying to save the thing and to get their hands on the on the merchandising. But who said that? And then you had the Dutch option for licenses and things like that. But I now didn't work for HRT. I didn't work for Skaife. I worked for Holden Motorsport, and we were theoretically contracted back to whichever race team we worked for. I never knew how that worked, but it just wasn't the same, and it wasn't fun because you're working for a big international corporate monolith, and you had to cross the T's and dot the I's and have the meetings and do all that, and it just lost its fun. I mean, I was, with great credit to Crennan, I was totally independent. If I said, John, I want to do this and I'm going to have a photo shoot and I want to take a poster and virtually shut the place down for a day, but yeah, okay, go for it. I didn't ask what the budget was. I just did it because it was going to be a good idea and good thing to do. And the boys by this stage would realise that Wally's going to bugger us up for a day earlier in the season, but hey, it's worthwhile because we know what the end results are like. So yes, then they'd give me the full attention. I'd have the whole crew and the engine departments, machines and trucks and everything doing a photo shoot. And I hate to think what it cost. Never, ever, ever was I asked to budget for something. You just did it. But all of a sudden you had Holden and say, okay, and what's your business plan for this and what's your budget for that? And you go, oh, leave me alone. It just wasn't fun.
Yes, welcome to the real world, Wal.
Well, this is true. I suppose it was. I'd lived in cloud cuckoo land for so long, basically living in a chocolate factory of having whatever flavour I could want on any day of the year. And now all of a sudden I was responsible like everyone else. I didn't like being responsible.
Yeah. Understood. Okay, look, one question that I've been busting to ask all through this, pretty much everybody or a large number of people in motor racing have got some kind of a nickname. Now, you're Paul Weissel. Where did Wally come from? I've got my own version of this, but I want to hear the truth.
I suppose, well, it works with alliteration, Wally Weissel, and that's probably the only reason it sort of remained, pardon me, after all these years. But back when I first came to Melbourne in the mid-'70s, and I was working for an advertising representative company that was part of the 2SM group in Sydney, and we were responsible down here for selling advertising to the Melbourne advertising agencies for the 2SM group of radio stations. And there was in the office there was 3 salespeople and 2 girls who did all the work. But the 3 there was the boss, myself, and this other guy, Peter. And Peter was putting on a bit of weight, and the girls started noticing it and they started calling him Puddin'. Now, you are of an age, Ray, where you would remember an old comic strip called Wally and the Major.
Yes.
All right. So the character was Wally, the Major, and the other character in the comic strip was Puddin'. So all of a sudden the girls went, oh, the boss, he became, the Major. I became Wally, and Peter became Puddin'. Now, the Major and the Puddin' part lasted less than a week, and Wally stuck for the last 30-something years. And I just can't get away with it. I mean, and I even call myself Wally. My wife calls me Wally. And if she ever calls me Paul, I know I'm in a lot of trouble.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I should imagine you don't mind being called Wally, but I'm sure you wouldn't have liked being called Puddin' all these years.
Exactly. With that, there is a little bit of puddiness there about me now, but then again, at my age, I can afford to do that, can't I?
Okay, couple of questions before we wrap it up. Do you still watch racing? Do you still watch supercars?
Yeah. No. Still love it. Still watch it. Probably a little critical of some aspects of it, shall we say.
Go straight ahead, please.
Or I'll look at it from a monetary point of view first. Back in the day, God, that makes me sound old when you say that, but we had Bridgestone was our tyre supplier, and you had Dunlop and you had Yokohama. Now, in back in those days, Bridgestone, when you go to a race meeting, they would have a drive tyre and a steer tyre in soft, mediums, hards, whatever. You had an intermediate tyre, you had wet tyres. Now, if it was really, really raining, Bridgestone would roll out what they call their Mindari Keys cut. Now, this is Mort Graham Brown did this over at Mindari Keys in WA, part and just north of Perth, when on a really wet day, and they sat there one afternoon in the rain cutting these grooves in this tyre. And so that was called the Mindari Keys cut for really, really heavy rains. So whatever the occasion was, track-wise and grip-wise, abrasiveness-wise, Bridgestone and Dunlop and Yokohama had a cut for it. At the end of each season, you'd go on the road to 4 or 5 race meetings, racetracks, and you test next year's tyres in drive tyre, steer tyre, soft, medium, hard, blah, blah, blah. You test those to make a decision on what tyres Bridgestone were going to make for you next year. So that was something you didn't pay for. You pay for your tyres now. We had shock absorber suppliers that said, we'll supply the shocks for you. You had people that supplied you your brakes and discs, pads, the whole box and dice. And these were fairly expensive things. Now, then they said control. So everyone has the same tyre, the same brakes, the same this, the same. So therefore, where do you find a tenth or 2/10 of a second? A tyre could give you a half a second to a second a lap that you didn't pay for because your tyre supplier did. But these days, you've got to find a tenth here or half a tenth to make up something somewhere. So we have engineers after engineers after engineers, and they're probably getting paid, 150,000 a year. So it's costing you tons of money to try to find a tenth of a second, whereas a supplier would supply that for you tenfold and they'd be paying the bills. So in some ways, I don't agree with the control thing. I can understand it, but I don't necessarily, because of the ones down the back that don't have the tyre. It's not fair. If I had the tyres, I could beat them. So you have a control tyre. They still can't beat you. But then it's something, if I had their brakes, I have a control brakes, I beat them. No, you don't. The people that got the better people and the better drivers and the better everything, they're the ones that are still going to win. And that's the realities of the whole thing. So you can whinge and bitch, but, we have control stuff to keep the numbers in there. The other thing is we don't have there's a couple of drivers. We lost Scott McLaughlin, I think, is the closest thing to a Brock or Lowndes. He's gone over to overseas. Chazzy Mostert's probably the next closest thing. The rest of them are pretty wooden, mate. They get out of the car after a race and they won a race and they go, the guys did a really good job today. Thanks very much. Wow, that's exciting. We don't cross over out of motor racing into general public stuff because we are just so controlled in what we do, and the PR thing is not seen as important as it was back in the middle 90s, early 2000s. I think it's a totally different landscape now.
It's kind of like we're missing a Thomas Mazera, aren't we? Somebody who actually told the truth.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, look at Scott McLaughlin. The thing that almost made Scott crossed over from motor racing to general public was when he won in the Volvo at that time. And he said, excuse the French, but he said, I just gave it some fucking jantle. Oh, geez, I just swore on bloody national television terror. I'm sorry. But it was such a natural moment. And that, because of social media these days, just crosses over into social media and they go, this bloke's a good bloke, isn't he? We don't do that now. Everything's so sanitised and straight and we don't say anything.
Okay, one more question, which I think I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. Now, given the fact that you spent 20 years at the HRT and the HRT became the Walkinshaw team, and then the HRT lost its official position as Holden's official racing team to 888. What are your thoughts on the fact that they've announced recently that they're going to go forward next year?
Probably a little surprised but not shocked. I mean, Walkinshaw Performance, Ryan Walkinshaw, is in the business of motoring and motor racing and you have to look where your forward business has to come from. And where General Motors is heading is I'm not sure. So I can understand that switch from a longer term business point of view. Others aren't going to agree with me on that necessarily, but I mean the question Ryan would have asked himself, I'm sure, and certainly the one that supercars should be asking itself, where to in 3 to 4 years from now with supercars, because I'm not sure there'll be a Chevrolet Camaro to be going on the track. We'll be where we were with Holden in 17, 18 when they pulled the pin. I'm not sure how long General Motors is going to run the Camaro for. Then what are you going to race? We're going to be in one-make series? And going on from that, as we become more electrified, what are we going to race then? And you know, the part of motor racing is the sight and the sound. You take the sound away, Bathurst is going to be a very strange place. You imagine, I'm going to have a pit stop here, and Shane Van Gisbergen's just come into the pits for his regulation, a recharge of the batteries. He'll be there for about 20 minutes, time for a shower, go to the toilet, have something to eat, read a book for a while, and then jump back in the car when it's got 80% charge in it. It's some interesting questions to be asked with supercars and motor racing in this country going forward.
I think you're absolutely right. Okay, 3 last questions. What's the best road car you've ever owned? The one that you really wish you still had?
Oh, well, I wish I'd kept my Brock Commodore, mate. As I sort of alluded to earlier, I bought a white VK Group A, which someone stole on me, but then I was very fortunate, and this is probably when I got closer to Brock, was I looked around and I found a Holden Calais second-hand with about, bugger all kilometres on the clock at Reg Hunt's Mile of Motors down in St Kilda way. Yes, on the Nepean Highway. And it was an interesting car in that it had a V8, big heads, and all the gear, and it had a manual gearbox in 31.
That's unusual.
Yeah, so it was very unusual. And the reason why was to get your homologation numbers up. So Holden were banging V8s and 4-speeds in just about anything they made. So I found this one. I went, oh, this is interesting. It's basically your Group A, but on the surface it's a Calais. But it looked like a epoxy Calais with, burgundy colour on top and silver bits on the bottom as they were in the VKs. And as I said, got to know Brock by this stage. And he said, why don't we turn that thing into a proper Brock car, Paul? Well, I said, okay, Brock, yeah, no worries. So I left it with him for a week, and it's come out and it's got the full kit on. It's got the wheels, the spoilers, front and rear, and it's got the colour coded sides on it all the way down. It's got its HRT run number or build number on it, whole box and dice, and this thing, funnily enough, turned out probably to be the first Calais director before the infamous Calais director that blew the whole block thing up in the first place at HDT. So, and that was just, a fantastic car, and I loved that thing. And when I think back on it, I sold it for a pittance a number of years ago, and I think, God, if I'd hang on to the thing now, how rare it was when you consider it. I wish I still had it, because it'd probably pay for another house.
The question, of course, was, did it come with a polarizer?
Yes.
It had to. Of course it had to.
That was another thing was Brock rang me, and again, I had probably about 87 or something like that late in the year, and he said, oh, Wally, he said, come down for Christmas and have a barbecue and a beer with the boys. He said, no, I just want to chuck something on your car. So, Brock, Friday afternoon, down there we go, have a couple of jars, snags on the barbie, all sort of thing. The cars disappeared down the back of the lot somewhere, came back up and I go, what? He said, I've got a special thing on it. I said, oh, has it? He said, yeah. Lifts up the bonnet and shows me the energy polarizer, nicely in the middle on the firewall, and on the back windscreen it's got the sticker, because we've got to have the sticker to align all the energy, all the organe energy. Right. He said, come on, I'll take you for a drive. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, come on now. Now this is Port Melbourne, right? We're down the back at Port Melbourne, and Brock's nailed this like you wouldn't believe. We're going on a little suburban road that runs alongside the Westgate Freeway, or what is the Westgate Freeway then? And we were going faster than the cars on the freeway rate. We were going absolutely batshit crazy. We were seeing 160 plus k per hour in suburban streets. I'm dying. I'm thinking, no, I'm going to be dying. We're going to go to jail. We're going to crash. We're going to be dead. And the boys got the eyes on. They were black. You know how bright when he was on it. Yes. The black eyes and just don't blink, steer. And he's flying. Oh my God! He said, "See, that's so much better, isn't it?" I said, "Brock, I wouldn't have a clue. I've never been around the back streets of Port Melbourne at 160k in my life before."
Yes, it's called not having a yardstick to judge it by.
Exactly. Anything you say, I believe you.
Okay. What was the best piece of advice anybody gave you in your career?
Probably.
Would it be John Crennan?
It'd be Crennan related, I'm sure. It'd be believe in yourself. And the main one, I think that's even probably more important, if you don't know, ask. Because there's so many times that you think I'll wing my way through this, and it's better to go. It's like as I mentioned with that situation at Bathurst with the Ronnie Harrop and his top of his strut towers. I didn't know what was going on. I was totally in the dark, and I was of no use to anyone. So I went to Ronnie and I said, "Ronnie, explain it to me in layman's figures," and he did. So yes, if you don't know, ask.
That's called common sense, really, isn't it? But unfortunately, common sense is the thing that's very, very uncommon.
Particularly in motor racing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Never, ever admit you don't understand.
Yeah. But no, that was the thing. The thing that if I didn't know how to do it, you ask, and I kept asking until someone could explain something that I could, even if it's something to do with the computer. I don't understand that. Explain that again. And so that was the best way forward, because if you try to wing it, particularly in what turned out to be in the HR2 years became an increasingly high profile gig, an important gig. Probably didn't realise it at the time, but in hindsight you do, that if you don't know something, ask, because if you get it wrong, it can be bloody disastrous for people. Very, very uncomfortable. The last question that we always ask people like yourself, from your memory, what was the best smell of motor racing? Oh, easy. Avgas. Yes. Avgas, mate. Hume Weir circuit, all those cars in those days used to run avgas in those bloody things. That lovely green petrol. Yeah, and you just go, oh, yeah, I'm the motor racers, I mean, when you conversely to that is when you went to the Grand Prix in Melbourne, and back in the days, and in Adelaide, when they would use concoctions that vaguely resembled petrol. You're not talking about 1987 with the World Championship cars coming out here, are you? No, I'm talking about Formula One cars. When they ran the stuff that they ran. I mean, you'd be down in pit lane in the support races for the F1 cars, and they'd be cranking up the F1 cars in the background behind you, and you couldn't breathe, and your eyes are streaming. You think, what the hell is in that crap? But avgas for me. It certainly wasn't something that you could buy from the local service station. Your engine would melt, mate. Oh, dear me. Well, look, Wally or Paul or Mr. Weissel, all three, it's been a thoroughly enjoyable afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your memories. You were a very central person in the history of the HRT for a long time, and we thank you very much for spending the time with us today. Always a pleasure, and I still love the memories. Good on you, kid. All the best. Cheers. Well, friends, that's the conclusion of another episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. We hope you enjoyed the tales contained herein and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, be sure to check out musclecarmag.com.au for news stories, news and galleries from the Muscle Car Vault. We add them weekly, as well as brand new digital issues as soon as they become available on the newsstand. Thanks for listening, and as always, safe driving and happy reading from the team at Australian Muscle Car Magazine.